Today, Open Source Security is talking to Christoph Kern. Chris is here to talk about it. He's got an amazing story about forks in open source. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll get rolling.
So, hello, I'm Christoph Kern, also known as Sheogorath on GitHub and social media, etc. And I've been the maintainer of Hedgehog for a while. I gave that over to more competent people these days, but I can still tell the whole story, how Hedgehog came to be, and a bit of the origin. So we came into the topic when I sent Josh a link to the Hedgehog history page, which is hedgehog.org/history, which tells a bit of the story behind Hedgehog. And the whole thing originates basically in HackMD, which some people might still or know as HackMD.io, which is like a markdown editor and collaborative markdown editor for all kinds of note-taking. It was started by some university students from Taiwan who back then, I think, wanted to replace Hackpad. I was around at that time. And they basically wrote the basic structure of what even nowadays is still the stable Hedgehog release. And they basically took it forward and developed it in an open source project under an MIT license, and walked forward like a few years to the point where basically I became involved with starting to contribute smaller pieces of code because I wanted to containerize the whole project. And then, as this always is, I wrote a bash script. Someone said, this should maybe be part of the main code. And then I contributed that, or at least contributed to the person that contributed that. And long story short, I got involved into the project there. At the time, it was simply called HackMD, and the same code that was running on HackMD.io was running on, or was available on GitHub. But at some point, I think it was 2017, yes. Basically, the original developers noticed, well, we're no longer students anymore, and life costs money, and they wanted to take the project a bit further, and they decided to basically professionalize HackMD. And what that meant was, while they didn't tell this anyone on the GitHub side of things or of the community side of things, they just stopped publishing the source code and built new features. So from like mid-2017 till October, there was like a big question mark in the community and around the community. What was happening? Like, was the project dormant? But why were there still new features on the cloud version basically now? And would they be contributed back to the open source version or not? And people were just in the air. And so at that point, I reached out to the developers. And as I reached out to them and asked, okay, like, what's the plan? Or is it abandoned? Or what's your plan with the repository? It was basically, we currently want to put more focus onto this kind of enterprise version, and we want to sell it. And open source code doesn't sell so well.
Right.
For whatever reason. And so if you want to continue to do security updates and this kind of stuff, you can do that. We can allow you or give you permissions on the repository for that. We don't really use the GitHub repository to deploy our version of the cloud code. So what they basically did was they offered me to contribute there by basically becoming the maintainer of the open source version. And back then I said, I wouldn't do that alone. I needed someone who would join. And I picked basically at random someone who was active in the community, and I said, hey, the guy was called Claudius. Hey, Claudius, are you interested? Would you take on this maintainership, because I don't want to do it like all on my own. And the result was he said yes, and there was one condition that we both made clear. We wanted to move the project from MIT license to AGPL, because we said it is fine that we like collect contributions and develop the project, but we don't want these to move to like the proprietary product and then be like, oh yeah, we provide free labor for them.
Sure. And we should clarify that, like an MIT licensed project, making that basically a private enterprise thing is completely valid according to the license. But with AGPL, tell us about AGPL. What does that mean?
Right. So AGPL is basically a GPL license which says whatever or as soon as someone contributes to the code, they have a certain amount of ownership over the code. And the license itself says that you have to publish the code to the project, to the people who have access or who can use the software. Now, that's for the regular GPL license, which means as soon as you distribute a binary of the project, you would need to also ship the source code with it. But you don't, this is also important, it doesn't mean that anyone can request the source code, but only the people who actually have access to the binary release.
Right.
Now,
That's right.
AGPL takes this whole concept one step further and is intentionally built for like web software or cloud software, because it says not only people who get the binary have or get access to the source code, but actually people who use the software, like who open the website. That's enough for you to be entitled to get the full source code of the project, basically. And so that basically makes sure that even a cloud-hosted version like HackMD.io, if it would use AGPL licensed code, anyone who can visit the app can basically request the source code. And that basically made sure that if they ever were to reuse the code that we contributed to the project, they would need to open source their proprietary code,
Right.
which a lot of business people consider quite poisonous at this
Yes.
point.
Yes.
And then things became complicated because now we had two maintained versions of this project. On one hand, we had HackMD.io, this cloud version, which at some point was also HackMD.ee or Enterprise Edition. And then we had HackMD, this GitHub build that basically anyone could self-host, that we fatally called CE, so Community Edition. But they were basically independent projects, but everyone kept coming with, oh, this is an open core model. Where are the features? Is there an overview of the feature difference? Things like that. And that didn't really work. Like there was a lot of issues where we basically just had to explain these are basically independent projects that are just using the same name. And you can imagine that this at some point was enough that people said, why don't we rename the project?
Yeah, right.
And so we renamed what previously was HackMD CE to then CodeMD. Cody was also a bit of a try to play smart, and it was from some Latin word, I think, for notepad or something, but it was close enough to code that people who don't speak Latin or anything would still get like, oh, it's maybe nice or going along the line with the hack thing. And that was the intent, to resolve this confusion. And that actually worked quite well. As I said, it was, now we had the AGPL version CodeMD, and then we had the proprietary version HackMD. And that worked for a year, maybe two. I think it was 2 years, yeah. Basically till 2018, 2019. At this point, we noticed that every now and then we needed a new project on GitHub, or we needed some permissions, or we wanted to try some GitHub actions and stuff like that. And at this point, this was all still GitHub Marketplace, and you always needed repository permissions for everything. And we said, well, why all this overhead every time we have to reach out to the HackMD developers and they have to do 3 clicks basically in their organization to allow these things? And so we proposed to move the project or the repository CodeMD out of the HackMD organization. And that didn't sit well with the HackMD developers.
Oh, interesting.
They basically said, no, we really like this repository to be without. There is a big community around it. And I mean, it's nice, basically marketing for us.
Nice.
To have this kind of community, and it's very well received. And even in, like, we also had people who were like in the educational space who were also contributing features to this open source version. And so for them, it was like a great door opener at the end of the day. And they didn't really want to see that move out of their control. And so when we proposed that, within a few days, they came up with a different proposal. They basically said, well, how about this? We have this proprietary core for our HackMD project. How about we open source this core TypeScript project and then basically port all the features into basically as plugins that you build over the past 2 years, as plugins on top of this core. And then everyone would be happy. You would have the whole rewrite that we did for the proprietary product, and things would work out. But from our side, it was like, oh, wait, are you trying to relicense the whole project from behind towards Apache license? And yeah, that basically resulted in a quite long issue thread where things were thrown around. Anyway, at the end of the day, we decided this was a line that we didn't want to cross, and we forked the repository to an own organization. Once again,
so second fork.
Basically second fork, basically called CodeMD. So we didn't learn from the first time, maybe, or actually we thought, well, we're the community people, we basically forked the repository. The project that we originally forked would go dormant within a few weeks, and then we would be basically the canonical CodeMD. And at this point, I also owned the domain codemd.org.
Oh, nice.
Which, of course, made things a bit easier. We also had a community forum and things like that. So it helped to already have some infrastructure built up at this point that was independent from GitHub. And this state of 2 CodeMDs kept existing for around a year, at which point we decided it's not worth it. Like, we basically insisted that we came up with the name and we wanted to keep it. But no one was going to give any on this. So finally we decided, okay, let's be the adults. Let's rename again. Why not? We did this once, we can do it again. And that was basically the moment when we renamed to Hedgehog, and someone made this like very nice hedgehog icon, which we now have as a logo. And since then, the project in this perspective has developed a lot. So this is basically a bit the story of the forks, how it all developed to the point where we are right now. So now we have an own organization, Hedgehog, and it has a Hedgehog repository, and everything lives in there.
And do you still own the codemd.org domain?
I still own that domain.
Nice. Okay. So, all right, let me see if I can summarize this. So, first off, HackMD starts, then you fork HackMD, and well, I guess who forked it is probably up for debate. But there's a fork, there's two paths. You've got the enterprise and the community, and then eventually you rename the HackMD community to CodyMD, which then has to be forked into a new organization. You have two CodyMDs by two different groups, and then eventually the fork you have of CodyMD becomes, I mean, whether that's a fork or not is probably up for debate, but it's functionally renamed to HedgeDoc then. Did I get it all?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
And now, I mean, this story is complicated enough, but what now becomes interesting from a security perspective is that up to this day, the CodyMD repository under the HackMD organization is still maintained by the original developers.
Wow.
Which has the fun implication that from time to time we see interesting security reports for that repository that at least the last one we fixed 2 years earlier from a different security researcher, but also the other way around. Like, you always keep a bit of an eye on the forks to make sure that you actually don't miss any of the security fixes.
Yes. I mean, that's a good point, because some amount of code is identical between the two projects.
Yes.
And obviously a security issue that affects that code that exists in both places probably affects both tools. That creates a whole mess too, because like, are they different CVEs? Are they the same CVEs? And even that's complicated as to how to deal with.
I think the easy part there is we use GitHub to report CVEs and do the whole GitHub security advisory part. And the other project doesn't. You just check the release notes if there is somewhere a commit or merge request which had like the keyword security in it, and hope that they label these all somewhat good.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I've been there. I know exactly how that works. I mean, my comparison would be like with Linux distributions, where every Linux distribution is effectively running their own fork of some upstream project. And so when there's a security vulnerability in the upstream project, all of the Linux distributions have to then patch it in their own special way. And they're all a little different how they do it. Some will backport, some will just upgrade, some might do some sort of mitigation, who knows. But holy cow.
Yeah, we basically do that on a code level.
Sure. Oh my goodness, this is bananas, Chris. Like, I'm looking. So there'll be a link in the show notes to this history. You have a graph that kind of shows what's going on, and it's wild. Holy cow, it's wild. Okay, so I think the obvious question here is, you have lived this bizarre path. Like, what's the takeaway? What's the lesson? If there's probably people that think forking is dumb and should never happen. There's people who think forking is a great idea and we should fork everything all the time. Like, tell us all about it. What do you think? Like, what have you learned? What would you suggest if someone's thinking about things like this? Or would you not suggest if someone's thinking about things like this?
I think we did some things very right. For example, the license change was, I think, early on very well called. The other thing that I think is something that I've taken away: never again do I take over a code repository in someone else's organization.
Yes.
I will move it right away or fork it or whatever, but I wouldn't go and maintain someone else's code again in that perspective.
I mean, okay, I'm gonna point out though, for you and anyone listening, is back in like 2018, GitHub didn't have as many nice features for the free repositories necessarily. So I don't blame you for that, because creating your own organization and then trying to set that up in a way that would have made sense and you would have had the features you wanted almost certainly would have been a lot more work. Today, in 2025, that is a much easier problem.
Yeah, I think even I don't think we had like that. I don't think we had any paid features back then. I think it was still like
Okay.
a free organization. But
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Okay.
I would still say, move it into your own kind of namespace. I know that's a stable on this channel or on this podcast.
Whatever. Namespaces are great.
Make sure you have control over it. The other thing is, yeah, buy a domain. That also helps a lot.
Yeah.
And from there, like we, for example, also did a lot of things that we had a subdomain git.codemd.org and nowadays git.hedgehog.org, which would just link to the right repository. Yeah, I think that's the second thing that no one thinks about first is as soon as you rename or fork a project, you have to update a lot of stuff in your releases.
Yes.
Because we had, for example, a lot of help links and stuff that, of course, link to the old repositories. And so you have to cut a new release just to get these out. And what we did at that point was to replace all the direct links to GitHub, etc., with links that basically used the domains that we were holding. So a bit like an URL shortener or something, but in our own domain space, making that easier.
Sure. But you don't think about this stuff, right? The number of most people don't fork things, like, well, or if you do, it's you don't really care. All right. We're coming to the end, Chris, and this has been like I still like my brain feels mushy after this one just for how complicated it is. But I'll give you the last word on this. What do you want to tell everyone who's listening? Maybe shout out to HedgeDoc, like lessons, anything you want.
Yeah. So one thing that we didn't talk about, we actually founded like a real world organization, a registered club in Germany, an EV,
Cool.
is it called? Which you can find at evhedgedog. No, I have to write it correctly. .org.
That's fine. Just send me the link. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yes. And there we start to organize like supporters around HedgeDog, and it tries to to facilitate the whole project a bit more. Currently only takes care of hosting the infrastructure, but that's where you can get in touch with people. We are at conferences, and you can also get stickers and things like that. So if you want to get in touch, there is everything around the club, as well as we have, of course, a Matrix channel, forum, things like that. These are good addresses.
Awesome. Yeah, no, for sure. And again, this is the sort of thing you don't always think about, especially when forking, but just when running a project, is there's all of the like clerical things surrounding it that I think it's easy to be like, oh, I'll just fork a project and write some code. But no, it's never just that easy. All right, Chris, I want to thank you so much. This has been a delight, a confusing delight, but a delight to say the least.
Yeah, I hope people take that well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.